Donald Trump's administration shocked the democratic world yesterday and pleased dictators like Putin and Xi Jinping. Trump's administration plans to shift its strategy for European stability, willing to abandon principles upheld since World War II. This is stated in the published United States National Security Strategy. These guarantees included military security assurances from the United States, and the countries that wanted to receive them joined the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Now, Trump has been urged to stop NATO expansion and never admit new members again in history in order to appease Russia, and Trump has also been urged to urgently make peace with Russia. If Europe doesn't agree, Americans are prepared to force this friendship. As for Russia's war against Ukraine, Trump's strategy directly states that Karenoi. The United States wants to quickly negotiate an end to military actions in Ukraine, with the goal of stabilizing the European economy, preventing unintended escalation or expansion of the war, and most importantly, restoring strategic stability in relations with Russia. So why are more and more experts claiming that Trump has directed the new United States security strategy against allies rather than against enemies? That's what we're going to talk about in this episode. My name is Pechiy. Let's discuss this topic together. But before we start, I ask you to subscribe to this channel, like the video, leave any comment under this video, and subscribe to my Telegram channel Pechiy News. The link is in the description of this video. There we post breaking news as it comes in. If you want to support the work of this YouTube channel, you can do so with any donation or paid subscription using the link in the description of this video. Any support you can give is appreciated. So, in one of the previous episodes, just yesterday, I explained in detail what exactly is included in the new United States National Security Strategy. What are these documents and how will they impact Europe and Ukraine? If you haven't seen it, check it out. In this episode, we will analyze how Trump directed his strategy against allies and partners, rather than against enemies. Bloomberg shared an interesting quote today. A rift in United States-Europe relations. The relationship that has defined world politics since World War II was clearly expressed in Washington's updated national security strategy, in which the states criticized not Russia or China, but Europe. So, if you read the entire 33-page document, it's not that long, you can see that. The new United States National Security Strategy, published by President Trump's administration and personally signed by the head of the White House, significantly deviates from the global agenda of the mid-20th century, warning that the European continent is facing civilizational destruction due to decades of economic decline, as well as political and cultural failures. But the most striking thing is that the document directly states, quote, "The days when the United States supported the entire world order like Atlas are over." Remember this quote. Trump's team stated directly that the United States is no longer a leader or a global policeman. The times when America supported the world order are over, and Trump says we will only take care of ourselves, and we don't care about anyone else anymore. This strategy essentially codifies what has been obvious for months since Trump returned to the White House. The United States has focused its attention on its own so-called backyard, and sees a divergence between Trump's America First doctrine and the European countries that are part of NATO. And what's even more telling, Trump's 33-page strategy barely mentions Russia's war against Ukraine. It repeats the usual justification for the invasion of Ukraine by Russian dictator Vladimir Putin, claiming that the United States should focus on, quote, ending the idea of NATO as an ever-expanding alliance. And, I'll stop right here and take a closer look at this situation, because this is really an outrageous state of affairs. The Trump administration cannot agree with European officials who have unrealistic expectations regarding the war in Ukraine. This is included in the strategy. Therefore, Washington intends to shift the responsibility for its own defense onto Europe, stabilize relations with Russia, and also abandon further NATO expansion in order to stabilize relations with Russia. What follows is truly shocking. One of the priorities of the Trump administration's European policy is outlined in the strategy. So, the quote, "to put an end to the perception of NATO as an ever-expanding alliance and to prevent such a development in reality," continued. Remind me, please, who in the world perceives NATO as an ever-expanding alliance? Russia, only Russia. It's only the Muscovites shouting with their filthy mouths that NATO is expanding, that they're going to attack us, that NATO is against us. Trump now says we need the Russians to stop thinking that way, so let's freeze NATO and stop expanding it forever. Well, because that doesn't contribute to stable relations with the Russian Federation. Let me remind you, it was because of the wild Russians during the Soviet Union that NATO was created in the first place. Now Trump says, listen, the Russians are very concerned. They see NATO as a constantly expanding alliance, and this needs to be prevented, but it's obvious where such a call comes from. The 28-point peace plan drafted in October-November by Trump's envoy Steve Witkoff, at Putin's suggestion through Kirill Dmitriev, included a ban on Ukraine joining NATO. European officials and analysts saw this as an undermining of NATO's authority, since such a move would force the alliance to change its membership rules and rewrite its regulations altogether. Because some bold little runt, Vladimir Putin, is dissatisfied with something, and as a result, such a move would call into question the United States' commitment to the organization's policy. And next, I'll quote Bloomberg, "The strategy document does not contain new policy directives, but it embodies the official political rhetoric of the current United States administration. A frequently shocking, unorthodox, and economically destructive approach to world affairs, including tariffs, reflections on invading Canada, tirades against Ukraine, and constant contacts with Beijing and Moscow." The document doesn't use the harsh language that Trump used this year at the United Nations when he warned that some countries are on the attack, but the essence of the message remains the same. The strategy also highlights commercial diplomacy and foreign policy that promote the revival of the United States economy, which the document calls the foundation of America's global position and the necessary basis for the United States Armed Forces. Even here, Trump is promoting business. Although previous versions of the strategy during former United States President Joe Biden's time, and, by the way, during Donald Trump's first term, focused on the threat from China and other adversaries. And they focused on cooperation with allies, not on criticizing Europe. Moreover, in Trump's new strategy, the rogue state North Korea is not mentioned at all, as if it doesn't exist. It's no longer a threat, but that's not even the funniest part. Venezuela isn't even mentioned in the national security strategy, even though the United States actively threatened it with ground strikes, and Trump said it was the main global threat. In fact, it's not mentioned at all in the Western Hemisphere. At the same time, the rhetoric toward Russia and China, the traditional geopolitical rivals, is very restrained, especially compared to the 2017 security strategy during Trump's first term, which stated that these two countries, quote, want to shape a world that is opposed to the values and interests of the United States. Trump said this in 2017, but in 2025 he changes his stance, saying we need stable relations with them. Once again, Trump, in the 2025 version, says that we need to establish normal, good business relations with two countries that, according to the 2017 version, wanted to create a world opposed to the values and interests of the United States. This time, the document accuses the American elites of a failed policy towards China, claiming that this country, quote, became rich and powerful and used its wealth and power to gain a significant advantage. Logically, the document supports Trump's promise to restore balance in economic relations with China by cooperating with allies. With whom? It's unclear with those you attacked. The strategy also mentions Chinese companies that have succeeded in building physical and digital infrastructure. And it is acknowledged that America and its allies have not yet formulated, let alone implemented, a common plan for the so-called Global South. The document states that it all makes sense, because essentially Trump is finally admitting that they want to leave Europe and fully shift their focus to the Indo-Pacific. The document only briefly mentions Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The strategies emphasize that the United States' efforts to end the war are aimed at stabilizing European economies, preventing escalation, and restoring strategic stability with Russia. This is a goal reflected in the Trump administration's attempts to include economic cooperation between Washington and Moscow in the peace process. But most importantly, the United States national security strategy does not place any blame for the invasion on Moscow, but uses Russia's war in Ukraine's strategy for further criticism of Europe, and to express disappointment in Trump's inability to end the war. Trump in this strategy almost says outright that Europe itself is to blame for Russia's attack. They should have agreed with the Russians. They should have done what he is now recommending. He says they should have been friends with the unwashed Russians, done business with them, and so on. And the whole strategy is reminiscent of J.D. Vance's loud speech in February at the Munich Security Conference. And now European leaders are trying to reformulate a coordinated response since that very February when J.D. Vance criticized the European Union. The document also contains a hint at positioning Trump as a president of peace, as well as a new emphasis on how business-based diplomacy can help resolve conflicts. In the section dedicated to Africa, the strategy promotes commercial cooperation in regions where tensions and wars prevail, like let's trade, and everything will be fine. And Donald Trump would have known that his strategy to reconcile everyone through business is a failed strategy if he hadn't criticized Europe but simply looked at its experience. Let me explain what I mean. German Chancellor Angela Merkel was 100% sure that if she made a lot of profitable business deals with the Russians, it would become unprofitable for them to go to war. Merkel firmly believed that all these Nord Streams and big business with Moscow were a guarantee of peace. Angela Merkel believed that if there was a very large trade turnover between Russia and Europe, Russia would not risk it, it would live peacefully, and there would be no war. As we know, Merkel was wrong, and Trump is now offering the world the same thing. He says, let's trade and there will be no war. This could cause a catastrophe. The United States reportedly wants Europe to assume most of NATO's conventional defense, from intelligence to missiles, by 2027. Some European officials consider this strict deadline unrealistic. Shifting such a burden from the United States to the European alliance countries will radically change the way Washington cooperates with its most important military partners. And now, according to Reuters, American officials have already warned their European colleagues that if Europe fails to meet the 2027 deadline, the United States may stop participating in some NATO defense coordination mechanisms. So, as you can see, well, finally, I would even say, finally, Washington has openly stated what they are aiming for. They are clearly moving toward leaving NATO, not physically, not actually. Today I like the phrase, a quote, I mentioned it in the previous episode, from one of the leaders of the German Marshall Fund, which says, for example, she says, I have a gym membership, but I don't go there. The same applies to America. It could stay in NATO, but not actually participate. Unfortunately, I'll have to leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like the video. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.